My name is Dorothy Miller, and I'm an ordinary widow living on an isolated farm in the heart of Kansas. For 5 years, I faced each dawn alone, praying to find meaning in my grief. But that September night in 2019 would change everything. Thieves broke into my property, thinking it would be easy. They didn't count on me. They didn't count on my unwavering faith. And they definitely didn't count on a courageous sheriff standing by my side not long after. Can you imagine life as a widow on an isolated farm, waking up in a bed that's too big, making coffee for just 1 cup, working the land alone because there's no one else to help? That was my reality since the death of my beloved Thomas in 2014. But I had my faith. I had my God, and I had hope that each new day would bring me closer to the peace I desperately sought. My farm in Ellis County, Kansas, was my sanctuary. Here in the Smoky Hill Valley, where my father and grandfather worked the land, I found comfort in every task. The farm wasn't large, only 150 acres, but it was mine. It was sacred. Every morning I would wake alone, look at the old picture of Thomas on the side table, that smiling man I loved, and kneel to pray. My hands clasped, whispering words of hope and gratitude as the Kansas breeze drifted through the windows. I brewed coffee in an old kettle, placed homemade bread on the rustic wooden table along with butter and jam that I made myself. I sat alone in the kitchen with the Bible open while the dawn light created caressing shadows on the furniture that had belonged to my family. Behind the window, the golden wheat fields stretched endlessly to the horizon. It was like being in the heart of paradise itself. Then came the work on the land, caring for each crop as if they were my own children, feeding the dairy cows, collecting the chicken eggs, watering the vegetable garden where I grew tomatoes, pumpkins, and lettuce. It was hard work, but it had a purpose. It was like honoring my family's heritage, but there was a void that neither faith nor work could completely fill. Sometimes, when the sun set over the fields, I would sit on the porch in a rocking chair and simply cry. Tears of longing, of loneliness, of a woman who had lost her partner and needed to learn to live again. My neighbors were few and far between. There were rumors in the small town of Hayes about robberies on isolated farms, houses broken into at night, sheds looted, farmers left fearful on their own land. I had heard the stories at the local church during Sunday Mass, but I always believed that my God would protect me. I never imagined I would be tested in such a terrifying way. That September night, when the Kansas air was crisp and the stars shone with supernatural clarity, that test would arrive at my doorstep. My life would never be the same again. Subscribe now to our channel to follow the complete story of how I faced those thieves with only my faith, my cross, and a heart full of courage. Discover how a dedicated sheriff not only saved me that night but also restored my hope of loving again. Don't miss any episodes of this series that is touching hearts across America. Click subscribe and turn on notifications to receive exclusive updates, behind-the-scenes footage, and the continuation of this extraordinary journey that proves God still works in mysterious and wonderful ways. That night began like any other in late September. The Kansas air was crisp, the stars shone brightly, and I was at peace with the world. I had completed my daily chores on the farm, adjusted the fences, fed the animals for the last time, and retired home, tired but satisfied. I took a warm bath in my old 1960s bathroom bathtub, put on the light pink cotton pajamas my daughter had given me 2 years ago, and lay down on my oversized bed around 10 o'clock at night. I said my nightly prayers as I always do, asked God for protection over my home and my land, and closed my eyes, expecting the peaceful sleep that came after an honest day's work. But the sleep wouldn't last long. It must have been around midnight when I woke to a strange sound. At first, I couldn't identify what it was. My heart started racing because something in my instinct, something deep within my body, told me there was danger nearby. I heard it again. It was the sound of breaking glass coming from somewhere downstairs, probably in the kitchen or living room. My whole body froze. My hands began to tremble as I slowly sat up in bed. I turned on the bedside lamp with trembling fingers, the soft light revealing my silent room. But downstairs, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Men's voices, harsh whispers, low laughter, men inside my house, men invading my sanctuary. I rose from the bed impossibly silently, my pink pajamas the only thing between me and the horror I knew was coming. My heart raced as I approached the bedroom door in tiny steps. The door was open. I could hear their footsteps. Now, multiple footsteps, at least 3 people. They opened drawers, pulled things off tables, their voices growing louder, more disrespectful. One of them shouted to the other, "Look in the kitchen, there has to be money somewhere." A widowed woman of that age always has money hidden away. My hands automatically went to the phone on the bedside table. I picked up the receiver, but there was no tone. The line was dead. Cut. My God, they cut my phone line. At that moment, I felt pure panic. I was alone in a house with 3 thieves who had already planned this robbery, who had cut off my communication with the outside world, who weren't afraid of breaking in because they knew I was alone. My legs went weak. I followed the only instinct I had left. I turned the key in my bedroom door and locked it. My room had an old key, one of those locks that could be picked from the outside with a fork if someone wanted to. It wasn't secure. Absolutely not secure. I searched for something I could defend myself with. There was an old metal candlestick on my dresser. I picked it up, heavy, but frightening. Then my gaze fell on the cross that hung on the wall above my bed. The same cross my grandmother had brought from Ireland when she immigrated to America. The same cross before which I had prayed for 5 years in solitude and pain. My hand reached out to it. When my fingers touched that cold metal, I felt something shift inside me. A calmness, a purpose, a strength that wasn't my own. The footsteps grew louder. They were climbing the stairs now, going up to the 2nd floor where I was, going up to meet me. My hands dropped the candlestick. I picked up only the cross. I opened the bedroom door as they reached the top of the stairs. One of them, a large, masked man, his malevolent eyes visibly shocked at seeing me standing in my pink pajamas, holding an old iron cross before me. He stopped. That moment, that silence, that face-to-face encounter changed everything. He was stronger than me. He had accomplices. He possessed a weapon that I would later discover was hidden in his pocket. But in that second, he saw something in my eyes that made him hesitate. He saw a woman who had faced devastating loss and yet remained standing. He saw a faith that was greater than any weapon he could carry. He saw a cross held by a widow who feared neither death nor the men who tried to invade her. "Get out of this house," I said, my voice firm despite the terror coursing through my veins. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave." I didn't recognize my own voice. It was as if something greater, more powerful, more real than my own human fear was speaking through me. The other 2 men reached the top of the stairs. One of them, the one who seemed to be the leader, looked at me and then at the crucifix I held as if it were a holy sword. "Let's go," he said to the others. "She's crazy. She's completely crazy." And in that instant, as mysterious as it had begun, they fled. They rushed down the stairs in a panic, out the window they had broken to get in, and disappeared into the Kansas night. I collapsed to the hallway floor, the crucifix still firmly in my hands, tears streaming down my face. My whole body trembled, but I was alive. I was safe. I had faced those men with only my faith and an old crucifix, and I had won that night in Kansas. I discovered that fear is just an illusion when you have God by your side. I discovered that I am stronger than I ever imagined I could be, and I absolutely never imagined that in a few days, the courage I showed that night would open the door to the most unexpected love my heart could receive. But that's the next part of my story. After the thieves fled, all I could do was sit on the cold hallway floor, still clutching the cross in both hands, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. It wasn't fear anymore. It was pure adrenaline coursing through my veins, the recognition of what had just happened, the realization that 1 minute had been different and I would be dead or worse. My pink pajamas were damp with sweat. My nails still gripped that iron crucifix as if it were my very life. And I realized I needed to do something. I needed to call for help. I needed someone to know that my house had been broken into, that dangerous men were roaming the Kansas fields that night. I remembered that my nearest neighbor, Mr. Peterson, was only a few miles away. I managed to stand with difficulty, my legs barely supporting me. I carefully descended the stairs, checking each canteen before going down to the next. The living room window was broken, glass scattered across the floor like frozen tears. The living room telephone was also destroyed, the wires cut. But there was an old flashlight in the kitchen cupboard. I picked it up with still trembling hands and walked through the Kansas night to Mr. Peterson's property. It took 20 minutes, 20 minutes that felt like hours. With each nocturnal sound, each breeze through the wheat fields, I grew frightened, believing the thieves were returning, but I kept walking, that cross still in my hand, that faith that had saved me still burning in my heart. When I arrived at Mr. Peterson's house, I could see a light on in his living room. I knocked on the door forcefully, almost desperately. It took him minutes to open it. A man in his 70s, his eyes blinking with confusion when he saw a frightened widow in her pink pajamas at midnight. "Dorothy, my God, what happened?" he asked, his voice worried. I told him everything, my fingers still pointing in the direction of my farm, my words tumbling out, the whole story gushing like a river breaking its banks. Mr. Peterson called the police from his phone. He offered tea, a blanket, comfort while we waited, but I couldn't stand still. I paced back and forth across his living room, still holding the cross. "You were very brave," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Most women your age would have screamed, would have hidden, but you stood up to those men." "It wasn't courage," I replied, my gaze fixed on the ancient cross in my hands. "It was faith, simply faith." The police arrived in 20 minutes, 2 county patrol cars, their red and blue lights cutting through the darkness of the Kansas dawn. A sheriff and 2 deputies got out of the cars. The sheriff was the first to approach. His name was William Cole. He was in his early 40s, with brown hair beginning to gray. At the sides, light brown eyes that seemed to carry their own history of pain and understanding. When his eyes met mine that first time, something changed. It wasn't just professionalism. It was something deeper. A connection I couldn't explain on that night of horror. "Mrs. Miller?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. I nodded. "I'm Sheriff Cole. I heard you confronted 3 intruders alone." Again, that narrative everyone had received about my actions that night. But the sheriff didn't look at me with superficial admiration. He looked with genuine respect, with understanding, as if he saw in me something he recognized in himself. While his deputies began to examine my house, searching for evidence, the sheriff stayed with me. He asked detailed questions. He listened to every word. He never interrupted me. He never doubted my story. He never questioned my courage. "Were you alone?" he asked, his tone soft. "Yes, always alone," I replied. He nodded slowly, as if processing this. "Reality. Your faith saved your life tonight," he said, his eyes briefly falling to the cross I still held. Not many would face dangerous men with just a symbol of faith that requires extraordinary courage. I looked at him, truly meeting his gaze for the first time that night. His eyes were deep, filled with compassion. There was pain there too, loss, the mark of someone who had lost something precious and had learned to keep living. The sheriff stayed on my property all night, while his deputies searched for evidence, collected broken glass, and photographed the crime scene. He stayed with me. He sat in my kitchen while I made fresh coffee and put out cookies I had baked days before. We talked about the incident, but we also talked about our lives. He told me that he had lost his wife 8 years earlier in a car accident while trying to save a family in danger on the road. "She was brave like you," he said softly, looking at his coffee cup. "She believed in helping others, no matter the cost." I heard the pain in his voice. I recognized the loneliness, because it was the same loneliness I knew. We were 2 lonely beings who had faced the worst things life could throw at us, and yet we remained standing. We still believed in goodness. We still had faith. As dawn began to break over the Kansas fields, painting the sky orange and gold, Sheriff Cole looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully interpret. "I need to get back to the station," he said, "but I'd like to return tomorrow night to check on your safety, if that would make you comfortable." My heart did something strange at that moment. It raced, it leaped, it responded to something in his voice beyond professional duty. "Yes," I replied. "I'd love that, Sheriff Cole." As he prepared to leave, I placed my hand on his arm. It was just a brief touch, a simple gesture of gratitude. But when our eyes met again, I felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. A possibility, a hope, an opening in a heart I believed to be permanently sealed by loss. That sheriff, with his deep eyes and genuine compassion, had opened a door I didn't even know was there. And as I watched him drive away in his patrol car through the dusty streets of Ellis County, I knew my life had changed again. This time, Not by terror, but by something far more dangerous, by hope, by possibility, by love. I couldn't sleep that morning after Sheriff Cole left, not because I was scared, but because something inside me had awakened. After years of lethargy, for the first time since Thomas's death, I was aware of my own body, of the way the coffee warmed my hands, of how the morning breeze touched my face, of the way my heart raced at the thought of the man who had spent the night protecting me. I got out of bed before dawn, made my ritual coffee, and sat on the porch watching the sun rise over the wheat fields. And it was at that moment, as the sky shifted from violet to orange, that I heard the phone ringing. State police had captured one of the 3 men trying to flee to Oklahoma. He was being interrogated, and in exchange for a lighter sentence, he was cooperating. But before authorities could confirm his identity with the other 2, the story had already leaked. A young reporter from the Salina TV station had gained access to police records. At 8 in the morning, while I was still in my woolen robe, drinking my second coffee, my phone started ringing non-stop. Journalists from Hayes wanting interviews, a producer from a local news program offering me a conversation on television, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, now curious about the brave woman who had faced armed robbers alone. I didn't want any of this. That story was mine, my personal moment of faith, my private test with God. But the media has its own way of seizing upon things, especially stories that sell hope in dark times. The local Ellis County newspaper ran the headline, 62-year-old widow confronts 3 armed criminals with only her faith and a crucifix. The story was relayed by the Kansas News Agency, then by the Midwest News Network. Within 48 hours, my story, my private terror, had become what journalists called an inspiring narrative of faith in action. What surprised me most was the community's reaction. People started showing up at my farm, not as curious visitors, but as pilgrims searching for something. A woman from a neighboring town drove an hour to hug me and tell me she had lost her daughter and had lost her faith, but my story had given her back hope. An 80-year-old man, a war veteran, told me he had cried when he heard that I had remained calm in the face of danger, that it had reminded him why he had fought for freedom. A group of children from a Sunday school arrived with a handmade banner that read, "Dorothy is a warrior of God." I went to Mass the following Sunday. Christ, the Redeemer Church in Hayes was literally packed. People were standing in the aisles, families I hadn't seen in months. Father Michael, whom I'd known since my marriage to Thomas 40 years earlier, called me to the altar during the homily. "Dorothy represents everything Christ taught us," he said, his hand on my shoulder, as the congregation rose to applaud. She didn't respond to evil with evil. She didn't respond to fear with rage. She responded with the most powerful thing in the universe: pure, uncomplicated faith. That moment was when I truly understood that something had changed within me. It wasn't about people's approval. It never had been. It was about the fact that I had confronted my own fear, had looked directly into the eyes of darkness, and had chosen to believe in something greater. And in doing so, I had given other people permission to do the same. My struggle had a meaning that transcended the 4 walls of my farm. So, on Tuesday night, Sheriff Cole returned. He said it was to check the security of the property, but his eyes revealed truths his words didn't express. This time, he brought coffee from a place he knew I'd like. This time, his visit wasn't official. He was dressed in civilian clothes. He sat with me on the porch, not in the kitchen, and as the sunset began to paint the sky in impossible colors, he turned to me and said something that would completely change the trajectory of our connection. "I received an offer," he said, his voice measured but with something pulsing beneath the surface. "A federal agency wants me to testify on a program about safety in rural areas. They wanted me to talk about how crime is growing on isolated properties, but I didn't accept." I looked at him, confused. "Why?" I asked. He took a deep breath, like someone about to jump off a cliff. "Because when I returned to the station that first night, my captain asked me why I had stayed at your house." He paused, and I couldn't give an answer that made professional sense. "Because the truth is, I wasn't there as sheriff. I was there because when you came down those stairs with that cross, you touched something in me that had been dead for 8 years. The silence that followed was deafening, complete silence that contained all the loss we had both suffered, all the loneliness we had both endured, and something new, something that frightened us both because vulnerability, after being kept hidden for so long, is the most dangerous thing in the world. William, I said, using his name for the first time, and that simple name between us created new territory. What are you saying? He stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the fields that stretched before us. Those fields I had cultivated alone for 5 years. Those fields that now seemed to be waiting for something. I'm telling you, I got a call today from a federal detective. They arrested the second man, and his identity isn't who we thought it was. This man, Ronald Drake, has a history that goes far beyond these robberies. He's connected to a much larger network. And, Dorothy, you were specific. Your farm was specific. They knew you were alone. They knew there was a crucifix here because someone passed on information about you. I turned to him, my blood running cold. What you're telling me is that this break-in wasn't random? I asked, my voice cracking. He turned to me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw genuine fear on his face. No, Dorothy, it wasn't random. And that means you could still be in danger. The fear I felt in that instant was different from the fear I had experienced during the invasion. That night, it had been immediate, pure, animal fear. It was the cry of the human body when confronted with imminent danger. But this was different. It was the fear that comes from understanding that you are at the center of something much bigger than yourself. That there are dark forces operating behind the scenes of your life. That you are not just a quiet widow on an isolated farm in Kansas. You are a piece of a puzzle that someone carefully designed. Sit down, Sheriff Cole said, his tone now completely different. It was no longer the voice of a man trying to approach romantically. It was the voice of a police officer in full protection mode. I sat in that rocking chair that had rocked for years, and he remained standing, his arms crossed, his face showing the concentration of someone processing critical information. The raid was planned, he began. The 3 men have criminal records in multiple states. Armed robbery, burglary, extortion. But what connects them isn't just a gang of opportunists. They work for someone. For whom? I asked, my voice almost a whisper. He took a deep breath. A man named Marcus Thorne. He runs a network of fences dealing in stolen goods that stretches from Nebraska to Oklahoma. He identifies specific targets, isolated rural properties where he knows there's money, jewelry, or valuable documents. And he has informants in various communities who provide him with details about potential victims. I stood up, my pink pajamas from a few days earlier now replaced by jeans and a brown sweater, but still feeling exposed. Like me, how did someone know about me? I asked, my voice trembling. Sheriff Cole did something that shocked me. He came closer and placed both hands on my shoulders. We don't know yet. That's what I'm investigating. But Dorothy, listen to me when I say this. You're not alone in this. You're not anymore. His eyes met mine, and I saw resolve. There, I saw a man who had lost someone he loved, and who had made an inner choice in that moment never to let it happen again if it was in his power to prevent it. I'm positioning a deputy on the road leading to your property. 24 hours a day. You have a direct emergency line to my cell phone. And I'm hiring a security system for your house. Something I should have done years ago. You don't have to do this. I began to protest, but he raised a hand. Yes, I do, and I will. Because now, I know there's a reason you were in my path, because there's a reason I was the one who answered that call that night. His hand moved from my shoulder to my face, his fingers gently touching my cheek. It was the gesture of a man who had made a decision. I'm asking permission to stay here tonight, and next night, and every night until I'm sure you're safe. Logic said it was a bad idea. We were practically strangers. The whole community was already talking about our connection. But there was something in his eyes that defied logic. It was the same thing I had seen when I came down those stairs with the cross. It was the presence of God working through human choices. Yes, I said simply. He spent the night on my living room sofa. I hear his footsteps downstairs all night, knowing he wasn't sleeping. That he was watching, protecting, choosing to sacrifice his comfort and rest for my safety. In the morning, when I went downstairs to make coffee, I found him holding a thick file, labeled Thorne, Marcus Unsolved Cases. He's smart, Sheriff Cole said, flipping through the documents as I placed a cup of coffee before him. He never leaves direct traces. He never touches anything personally. He always uses intermediaries, but the federal investigators are closing in. The man who was captured is cooperating. They expect to have Thawne in less than a week. And then? I asked, sitting down beside him. He looked at me in a way he never had before, as if he were seeing through layers of social and professional complexity to the stark truth of what he felt. Then, you can go back to your life, your farm, your peace. He paused, without me. The way he said it, the way those last 3 words fell between us like a stone in still water, revealed the conflict within him. He had been assigned to protect me, but in 5 days, he had begun to want much more than that. What if I didn't want to come back? I asked carefully. He closed the file. He put it on the table and turned to me completely. Dorothy, you barely know me. You survived a terrible trauma just days ago. You don't have to decide anything now. But there was hope in his voice. A man trying to do the right thing while his heart screamed something else. I know you, I said, and it was true. You know people by the choices they make when no one is watching. You know them by how they deal with their pain. You know them by their constant presence when there's nothing in return. And you don't need to be wary of me. I'm stronger than I seem. That night, after Sheriff Cole finished his reports and returned to the living room sofa, I stayed awake thinking about something he had said, that there was a reason he was in my path, that there was a purpose in the timing of all this. 5 years of solitude, a test of faith, a man who had learned about grief, a crime ring being dismantled because thieves broke into the right farm on that particular night. It was as if I were looking at a pattern so grand that it had been invisible until now. As if God had woven threads that seemed random but formed a tapestry with purpose. That purpose would become much clearer 24 hours later, when Sheriff Cole received a call that would change everything. Leave your vote here. Do you believe that Dorothy and William are destined for each other? Leave a leaky to show us that you're following this extraordinary journey of faith, courage, and unexpected love. This is a crucial moment in the story, where invisible threads are being twisted. The next revelation will shock you, so don't miss it. Comment now what you think the next discovery will be. Does Marcus Thorne have a personal connection to Dorothy? Is there something in William's history that connects him to this case? Will the truth about why Dorothy was specifically targeted revolutionize everything you thought you knew? Leave your comment below. We want to know what you're thinking. We want to know if you believe that miracles like this really happen. We want you to be part of this community of people who believe that God works in mysterious and wonderful ways. The more comments and likes we receive, the better we prioritize releasing the next episodes. Do you want to know what that phone call revealed? Leave a like now. Do you want Dorothy to discover the truth about the men who broke into her house? Comment your theories. Do you want to see William protecting Dorothy against the dark forces targeting her? The next episode will be released soon, but only for our subscribers and for those who leave likes and comments. Be a part of it. Be a part of this story, because stories like these only exist when communities like you choose to be a part of them. Don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications, and invite your friends who believe in faith, courage, and second chances. They need to hear this too. The call came as we sat at the kitchen table eating toast with homemade jam. It was a normal Thursday morning. The sun streamed through the windows of my 1960s kitchen in a way that made everything seem simple and safe. William had spent the night on the couch again, and for the first time since the incident, I had slept without nightmares. I had slept like someone who had surrendered their fear to someone who could carry it for them. His phone vibrated. He picked it up. He looked at the screen, and something changed in his face that was so subtle most people would have missed, but I had learned to read every muscle in William Cole's face in the last few days. I had learned that his eyes blinked slightly when he received news that his police training told him to maintain composure. I need to answer this, he said, rising from the table. He walked to the balcony, closing the door behind him. Through the glass, I saw him with the phone pressed against his ear, his posture growing increasingly rigid. His fingers formed a fist, his jaw tightened. Then he took a deep breath, like someone receiving a blow. When he came back inside, there was something different in his eyes. Determination, yes, but also something that dangerously resembled remorse. They arrested Marcus Thorne, he said, sitting down at the table but no longer touching his toast. They found enough evidence for a warrant. He's in custody now. It should have been good news. Thorne in jail meant I was safe. It meant the criminal network had been disrupted. It meant that the security system William had installed in my house, could now protect a woman who had returned to normalcy. But there was a quality in his voice that contradicted this narrative. "What's the problem?" I asked. He placed the phone on the table and rested his head in his hands for a moment. "A man processing something. He wants to talk to you," William said finally. "Thorn, he's been insisting to his lawyers that he wants a conversation with you in person, before any deposition, before any formal interrogation." My stomach churned with me. Why? I don't even know him. William stood up, began pacing my kitchen like an animal in a cage. "We don't know. Not yet. But Dorothy, there's something you need to know. Something the feds discovered when they investigated Thorn's network more deeply." He paused at the window, gazing out at the wheat fields through the glass. "Thorn has been operating for over 15 years. His crimes spanned 5 states. But throughout all that time, in all those operations, he has never been personally violent. He plans, he coordinates, but he doesn't commit the crimes with his own hands. It's as if he maintains a moral distance from his actions. However, there is a pattern that investigators have found." I turned to face him fully. "What pattern?" "Every time an operation goes wrong, every time a target refuses or a crime is thwarted, he personally tracks down the reason. And if the culprit is a person, he takes them out of the game permanently." The words landed like stones. Permanently. "What are you telling me?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "I'm saying you were the first person in your history to stand up to your men and win. You didn't run, you didn't hide, you stood up, and you survived. Nobody does that in your world. Nobody. And Dorothy, there are more." He came to me and knelt, his eyes level with mine. "When the feds traced how your names and information got to Thorn, they discovered something we weren't expecting to find." My heart raced. There was a quality in his voice that told me this went beyond organized crime. This was personal. "The informant," William continued, his voice very soft now, as if he were telling a patient they had bad news. "The man who passed your information to Thorn, who knew you were alone, vulnerable, with a house full of antique possessions and family jewels, who knew your routine, who knew exactly when you would be sleeping." "Who?" I whispered. "Your neighbor, Mr. Peterson." The air left my lungs, not as a shock, as a betrayal. Because betrayal is worse than shock. Mr. Peterson, who had brought homemade bread for 5 years, who had asked how I was, who had embraced me at Thomas's funeral and cried with me, who had rushed to help when I asked after that terrible night. "No," I said, but it was more of a question than a statement. "Yes," William replied, "he's also in question. It seems Thorn has discovered something about him. Gambling debts. A lot of money lent to very dangerous people, and Thorn offered an opportunity. Provide information on potential properties in the area. Help identify lonely widows with valuable properties, and the debt would disappear." William took a deep breath. "Dorothy, the reason Thorn wants to talk to you is that he feels his plan was ruined by a woman he never considered a threat. It's not about apologizing. It's not about remorse. It's about trying to understand how his logic failed." I got up and walked to the window. The fields I had loved for 5 years now looked different, as if they had kept secrets, as if the very land my family had cultivated had conspired against me. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Nothing," William said, coming over to me. "You don't have to talk to him. We can keep you safe without ever hearing his name again. I can guarantee that." But there was something in his voice, a hesitation, a crossroads he had reached but couldn't get past. "But you want me to talk to him," I said, turning to face him. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me in a way that made me understand he'd spent hours the previous night on the couch, not sleeping, grappling with this very question. "If you talk to him, we can learn more about how he operates, his motivations, his next potential victims. The feds could use that information to dismantle the entire network, not just the local cell. They could stop this before it happens again to other widows, other lonely women, other vulnerable people on isolated farms." "You want me to become bait?" I said, not as a question. "I want you to be the warrior you were that night," he replied. "But this time, not just for yourself, for all those who will come after you." I walked to the rocking chair in my kitchen, the one that had come with the house, the one that had rocked for decades. I sat in it, and I started rocking, back and forth, like a woman going back in time. "If I do this," I began slowly, I need 2 things. William waited. First, no one else lies to me. There are no undercover agents among my neighbors. There are no listening devices hidden in my house. I want complete honesty about what's happening and why. Second, I paused, looking at him. You stay with me, not as sheriff, as William, as the man who chose to stay on my living room couch because he believed he deserved protection. He knelt down again, and this time, when he looked at me, there was no longer a sheriff in his eyes. There was only a man who had found the rarest thing in life, someone who understood him. Done, he said. I agreed to speak with Marcus Thorne. I agreed to go into that interrogation room at a federal police station in Kansas City, traveling with William, my crucifix hanging around my neck, my faith intact. What neither of us expected was what Thorne would tell me in that encounter, what he would reveal about his own story, about why he had done what he had done, about a woman he had once loved 20 years ago, who had been abandoned by her husband while raising a daughter alone on an isolated farm in Nebraska. A woman who had given up everything, a woman who had died alone and poor while her ex-husband traveled the world spending their ill-gotten gains. And I would realize, sitting in that small room with my hands glued to the security recorder, that Marcus Thorne had spent 2 decades taking revenge on widowed women in the hope that each one represented the woman he had lost, and that my courage that night had broken a cycle of pain that had haunted that man for a long time. This is the moment. You've been waiting for exactly this. Leave a comment explaining if you think Dorothy should talk to Thorne, or if she should reject the offer completely. Do you think there's any redemption possible for a man who has built his entire life on revenge? Leave a like to show you want to know what Marcus Thorne will reveal in the interrogation room, because the next segment will expose truths that no one expected to discover. Prepare to have your heart shaken. The interrogation room in Kansas City was exactly as I had imagined it for years while watching police on television. Cold, fluorescent light, metal tables, a mirror that everyone knew was one-way glass. But there was something no television set had prepared me for. The silence, that dense silence that exists when 2 people see each other for the first time in circumstances neither of them fully planned. Marcus Thorne was sitting on the other side of the table when I entered. William was beside me, his hand finding the back of my waist in a gesture that was half protection, half ownership. He didn't want me there. Every fiber of his being said he would rather put his own body between me and that man. But he knew I had made my decision. Marcus Thorne was not what I had expected. My brain had constructed an image of a villain, someone with cruel eyes, with the visible mark of evil in his features. But Marcus Thorne was 52 years old, with gray hair, a face that seemed to have aged a decade more than the time he had lived. There were deep lines on his forehead. His gaze was intelligent but tired, like someone who had carried something very heavy for a long time. When he saw me, something almost invisible passed across his face. Recognition not of me personally, but of the idea I represented. The woman who had broken his pattern. The woman who had refused to be victimized. Dorothy Miller. He said, his voice rough like sandpaper on old wood. Finally, I didn't answer. I simply sat down in the chair that had been positioned in front of him, William remaining standing near the wall, his arms crossed, his eyes never leaving Marcus Thorne. The federal agent, a man named Agent Davies who had briefed me before I went in, was outside watching through the glass. Everything was being recorded. Everything was evidence. Do you know why I'm here? I asked, my voice steady. I had prepared certain questions, certain points the feds wanted me to address. But at that moment, looking at Marcus Thorne, I realized there was only one thing that truly mattered. Do you know what I am? He answered my question with a question. I raised an eyebrow. I'm a man who built a system that worked perfectly for 15 years, Thorne continued. A system that exploited a pattern I had observed in the world. Loneliness, vulnerability, geographic isolation. All very predictable. All very manageable. You're talking like someone proud of their actions, I said. Thorne smiled, but it wasn't a smile that reached his eyes. I'm talking like a scientist who sees his experiment disproven. You were an anomaly in my data, Dorothy, a variable my formula hadn't accounted for. He leaned forward, his handcuffs making a metallic clang against the table. William tensed, but I raised a hand, urging him to wait. The woman who confronts Thorne continued, instead of hiding. The woman who picks up an old cross instead of money to save herself. You shouldn't exist in my world. You should have screamed. You should have surrendered. You should have become the kind of story I told to ensure my men did their job properly." There was something in his words that was almost a confession, almost admiration. "You want to understand how a 62-year-old woman deferred her system," I said. It wasn't a question. Thorne leaned back in his chair. "I want to understand," he replied, "how a life I've seen from thousands of different angles can still surprise me." Silence fell again. I stared at him for a long time. Then, instead of answering his question, I asked mine. "Who was she?" Thorne blinked. His hand clenched into a fist. "Who was who?" he asked. But his voice had changed. "There was a crack there. The woman you were trying to avenge." I continued. "The woman isolated on a farm that her ex-husband left behind. The woman who died alone while he squandered his ill gains. Who was she to you?" For several seconds, Marcus Thorne simply stared at me. And then, in a movement no one expected, his shoulders slumped. He covered his face with his hands. And when he lowered them again, his eyes were red. Not with anger, with grief. "My mother," he whispered. "My father left her when I was 22. She stayed with the farm in Nebraska, alone, working to keep everything together. I wanted to help, but I was building my life elsewhere. I promised I'd come back. Promised I'd take care of her." His voice broke. "But I got too busy, too focused on my own success. And one day, I got a call from a nurse saying she'd died, alone in her bed. No one had seen her in 3 days. I did the hardest thing any victim can do. I stood up, walked around the table, and placed my hand on his shoulder. William made a sound of protest, but I shook my head, asking for patience. "I'm sorry for the loss of your mother," I said genuinely. "But Marcus, punishing other women doesn't bring her back. Abandoning your own life doesn't honor her memory." Thorne turned to face me. "How do you know about honoring memory?" he asked bitterly. "How do you know the pain of losing someone who has ceased to exist on their own?" "Because I am Dorothy Miller," I replied. "And 5 years ago I lost my husband. I spent 5 years waking up alone in a bed that was too big. I spent 5 years praying that God would show me a purpose to keep living. And then, the night you sent your men to my house, instead of taking the path of vengeance that you did, I picked up a cross. I picked up faith, and I chose to believe that the universe had a greater purpose." My hand remained on his shoulder. "You can make the same choice now, Marcus. You can spend the next 30 years feeding anger in the prison system, or you can do what your mother would have wanted you to do, forgive yourself and find redemption." The federal agent, who had entered the room when my hand touched Thorne, was on his feet. "Ms. Miller," he began, "you shouldn't." But I raised my hand. "May I have a minute?" I asked. Agent Davies exchanged glances with William, who, after a pause, nodded slightly. The agent left the room, leaving only the three of us, William, Marcus, Thorne, and me. "What do you want me to say?" Thorne asked, his hands still trembling. "I want you to start telling the truth," I said. "I want you to tell the feds every operation, every network, every person involved. I want you to help dismantle the system you built. And I want you to ask forgiveness, not from me, but from every woman you tried to exploit, starting with your neighbor Peterson, because he, too, is a victim of your system, even if he chose to cooperate." Marcus Thorne took a deep breath, and then, for the first time since I entered that room, he nodded, slowly, painfully, like a man finally putting down a very heavy burden. "I'll tell you everything," he said, "not out of fear of prison, but because you're right. My mother wouldn't have wanted this. My mother would have wanted me to live better." When we left the interrogation room 2 hours later, William immediately pulled me into his arms. "You're the bravest woman I've ever met," he whispered into my hair. "You'd never let me into that room again." I smiled, despite the exhaustion that had begun to envelop me. "You trusted me," I said simply. That was enough. But as we drove back to Kansas, as the yellow and brown fields rolled past the car, when I began to process what had happened. I had entered that room, expecting to confront a villain. I had discovered a broken man. I had entered as a victim. I had left as something nameless, not redeeming, not saintly, but someone who had chosen to expand her circle of compassion to include the very man who had tried to harm her. And that choice had opened a door I didn't know I needed to open. William kept a hand on my knee as he drove. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I'm Thinking, I began slowly, that I spent 5 years waiting for God to show me a purpose, and that when it finally came, it wasn't in the way I expected. It wasn't a perfect life with a perfect man on a safe farm. It was messier than that, more real, more human. "Are you ashamed?" William asked, and there was real fear in his voice. The fear of someone who had begun to believe in something new, and who feared losing it. I took his hand and placed it against my heart. "No," I replied. "I have peace. For the first time in 5 years, I have true peace. Because I finally understand that God doesn't take away our grief. He gives us companions to carry it with us." William squeezed my hand, and we drove in silence across the Kansas plains, two solitary beings who had found each other not by chance, but by divine design, somewhere between Kansas City and Ellis County. Between the horror of the incident and that moment of peace in the car, something fundamental had changed. Not just in me, in William, too. Because when a man sees a woman choose compassion for her criminal and then choose peace for her own heart, he understands that he is in the presence of something rare, something sacred, something that deserved to be protected and honored for a lifetime. And William Cole, who had spent 8 years believing he could never love again, suddenly realized that he was completely, irrevocably in love. Did you think this would all be action and drama? Leave a comment telling us how you felt when Dorothy touched Marcus Thorne. Would you have done the same thing, or would you have kept your distance? Leave a like for those who understand that true heroism isn't about defeating enemies, it's about turning enemies into humans. The next segment will explore that moment in the car. That moment where William finally understood the depth of his feelings, and it will all lead to a decision that will change everything. The weeks that followed Marcus Thorne's interrogation were the strangest weeks of my life. Strange not because they were bad, but because for the first time in 5 years, my life was moving in directions I had never planned. Marcus Thorne had made a deal with the feds. In exchange for his full cooperation, he received a reduced sentence. He provided names, locations, methods. His network was dismantled in a matter of months. Operations in 5 states were shut down. Women who would never have known their names were protected because Marcus Thorne finally chose to tell the truth. Mr. Peterson was sentenced to 3 years in prison for his involvement, a lesser sentence because he showed genuine remorse. But before going to jail, he asked to see me. I had initially refused, but William encouraged me to listen to what he had to say, not to forgive him, but for my own healing. So in a cafe in Hayes, the man who had eaten my home-cooked meals for 5 years asked for my forgiveness, not with empty words, but with tears that were so genuine I couldn't contain my anger. I was desperate, he said. My grandchildren needed an education. My debts were drowning me, and Thorne offered me an easy way out. I took his hand on the cafe table. "I hope you find peace in prison," I said. "I hope when you get out, you find a new purpose." He left with a lump in his throat. I stayed in that cafe, drinking cold coffee, wondering how a person could contain so much pain, so much betrayal, so much complex humanity. William was waiting outside. He took me to a drive-through ice cream stand at the end of Vine Street, just like teenagers do. We ate ice cream in his car and laughed at jokes that weren't particularly funny, but seemed absolutely hilarious at the time, because sometimes laughter is just a way to release pent-up tension. In September, exactly 1 year after the incident, the fields around my farm were turning golden again. The wheat was ripe, the cycle had been completed. The flowers I had planted in the spring had bloomed and then withered, and then returned to the earth. Everything on that farm moved in cycles: death, renewal, growth, loss, and I had learned to live within that pattern instead of against it. William had started bringing his things to my house week after week. A pair of shoes here, a stack of books there, his cone coffee maker that he insisted made better coffee than any I could brew, until one day, I realized he wasn't just sleeping on the couch or in the guest chair anymore. He was living here. We had fallen into a relationship so naturally that no formal discussion had been necessary. Just two lonely souls who had found comfort in each other and decided that comfort was enough to begin with. But William wanted more than comfort. I knew it. I saw it in his eyes whenever he looked at me while I made coffee. I saw it in the way his hand found the back of my waist when we walked through the fields. I saw it in the way he prayed with me at night, his low voice whispering words of gratitude for simply being alive, being here, being with me. Then the day arrived. It was a Saturday in September. There was nothing special about that day that stood out from the calendar. The weather was slightly cooler than previous Saturdays, signaling that autumn was approaching. I had been working in the garden, harvesting tomatoes before the first frost. My hands were dirty with soil. My face was sweaty under my straw hat. I looked exactly as I am, a 62-year-old woman who spends her life working the land. William left the house carrying 2 cups of ginger tea. It was our afternoon routine. Tea, sitting on the porch, chatting about nothing in particular. But as he walked toward me through the garden, something was different. His walk, his posture, there was an intentionality there that I couldn't quite place. "Come," he said, his tone gentle but firm. He placed one of the teacups on a wooden table and led me not to the veranda, but to the field. We walked between the rows of wheat that were ready for harvest, the golden grain brushing against our thighs. We walked until we reached a point where no one could see the house. Only us and the fields that stretched to the horizon like an ocean of gold. "Do you remember when you asked me if I believed in destiny?" William asked, his voice in a tone I had never heard before, as if he were speaking to me through a layer of emotion I could barely contain. I replied that I remembered. "I said I believed now," he continued, "because when I received that call that night a year ago, when I arrived at that house and saw you coming down the stairs with that cross, I understood that everything in my life, every choice I made, every day I lived after my wife died, had been leading me to that moment, to you." My heart raced in a way that wasn't fear. It was anticipation. It was the recognition that something important was about to happen. William placed a hand on my face, his fingers tracing my cheek as if memorizing the shape of my face. "Dorothy, you are the bravest woman I have ever known. You are the kindest woman. You are the woman who chose to see humanity in a man who tried to harm you. You are the woman who gave me back my life." He knelt, but not on the ground. He knelt in that golden wheat field, the ring box trembling in his hands because he was trembling too. "Dorothy Miller, will you marry me? Not because you're lonely, not because you need rescuing, but because you choose me, day after day, for a lifetime. Because you choose to create a life with me that is full of purpose and faith and love that survives any storm that comes." I couldn't speak at first. I just looked at the man who had entered my life as sheriff and had become my confidant, my protector, my love. Tears began to stream down my face. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, William Cole. Yes to the life we will build together. Yes to the faith we will share. Yes to every day that God gives us." He slid the ring onto my finger. It was simple. Gold with a small diamond. Nothing extravagant. Nothing you'd spend a fortune on. It was perfect because it was honest. It was real. It was exactly the kind of ring a woman like me, a woman who had learned that true value lay in simplicity and faith, would want to receive. We were married in November in that same Christ the Redeemer church where the community had risen to applaud my courage a year before. Father Michael married us. The community came. My friends, my family, neighbors who had followed my journey from loneliness to love. I wore a simple white dress that a local seamstress had handmade. William wore a suit that had belonged to his father, a suit he had kept for 8 years, waiting for the day he would believe he deserved to be happy again. During the ceremony, when Father Michael asked if I accepted William as my husband, I didn't just say yes. I raised my crucifix, the same crucifix I had held on that terrifying night a year before, and placed it around his neck. "With this cross that saved me," I said for the whole congregation to hear, "I promise that my faith will also be your faith, that my love will also be your love, that together we will survive any storm." There was a sacred silence in that church, and then an embrace that seemed to echo from heaven itself. The years that followed were everything I had hoped for and nothing I had planned. But that's always the nature of life. It's not what we plan. It's what we choose to do with the unexpected. We converted Mr. Peterson's house, which had been left empty, into a shelter for widowed women who were processing their loss. We named it Thornhouse in honor of the man who had committed crimes against them, but who had offered redemption in the end. Because redemption is a powerful thing. It can change a person. It can change a community. It can change the world. Marcus Thorne, when he was finally released 5 years after his imprisonment, asked to volunteer at the shelter, not as a leader, but as a gardener. He spent his days planting flowers, tending to vegetables, creating an outdoor space where widowed women could find peace in the earth, just as I had. He never spoke about his past, but the women knew, and some of them, curiously, found comfort in knowing this redeemed man, because it meant that perhaps they too could find redemption from their own trauma, from their own loss. William retired after 25 years as sheriff. He began writing about crime in rural areas, about how isolated communities could protect themselves. His book, Faith in the Fields: How Rural Communities Confront Crime, became required reading in police academies across the country. But his greatest pride was simple. It was being home with me. It was waking up each morning next to a woman who had taught him that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the presence of faith despite fear. I continued tending the farm, because the land is a teacher. It teaches you that cycles are important, that death is necessary for renewal, that patience is rewarded with harvest. At 72 years old, I'm still waking up early, still working the land, still praying for those who come after me. And every September, when the wheat begins to turn golden again, William takes me to that same field where he proposed. We sit in the middle of the wheat fields. He holds my hand, aged now, stained with work and time, and he whispers, "Do you still believe in destiny?" And I answer, "Always." The same thing. It's not destiny, William, it's faith. It's the grace of God working through our choices. It's the universe conspiring so that two lonely souls find each other and discover that no one needs to be alone if they choose to believe. This is my story of an ordinary widow on an isolated Kansas farm who confronted thieves with a cross, discovered compassion in a man who had tried to harm her, and found a love so real and so honest that it transcended any romance Hollywood could write. Because true love stories aren't about perfect moments. They're about two people choosing to keep choosing each other, day after day, through storms and harvests and everything that time throws at us. If you've made it this far, you've experienced the complete story of Dorothy Miller, the woman who changed my understanding of courage. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories of faith, love, and redemption, because the world needs to know that miracles still happen on the plains of Kansas.